Welcome to the Managing Violence podcast, where we talk all things self-defense, violence prevention, and aggression management. My name is Joe Saunders. I'm your host. Let's go. Good afternoon, everybody, or morning, or evening, or whenever it is you're listening to this podcast. Let's face it, we've got listeners all around the world, and you all listen to it at different times. So wherever it is, I hope it's a good time for you at the moment. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Managing Violence podcast. We have a treat for you today. I've got Mr. Gabe Cohen. Gabe has a life story unlike anyone else I've ever spoken to, certainly unlike any other guest we've had. I don't believe I've ever had anyone on the podcast who's been to prison 7 times and can tell the story about it, except for Rory Miller. I mean, Rory went to prison every day for a number of years, but he was working there, so that's a little bit different. Gabe's got a great story. We're going to get into that very shortly. But first, I just want to go through a couple of housekeeping issues, a little bit of news to keep you updated on. So, first things first, Patreon. As you've heard the last couple of weeks, we are now on Patreon. And as I said, anyone who signs up gets a shout out on the podcast. And I'd just like to give a shout out to Mr. Jeff Berman. Jeff became a Blue Belt contributor during the week. And thank you very much, Jeff. It's people like you that keep this podcast going. If you know Jeff, give him a pat on the back from me. But thanks very much. And just a reminder, check out patreon.com/managingviolence just to check out the options and see if you're able to support us in any way. I just want to give you a quick roundup of our social media channels. I'm trying to get a little bit more active in pushing the podcast out there. So if you're on any of these platforms, please check us out. So our most active platforms are Instagram and Facebook. You'll find us on both of those channels at Managing Violence. At Managing Violence, you'll find all the content there. I'm trying to use Facebook and put up some video as well as some general posts and discussions. So check that one out. Instagram, obviously, a lot of images and discussion as well. YouTube, again, trying to push the YouTube content a little bit. I'm starting to edit some snippets from old interviews for you to share around in little bite-sized chunks if you're interested in doing so. On Twitter, I am at Joe Saunders MVP, at Joe Saunders MVP. So MVP like Managing Violence podcast, not most valuable player. Although I am the most valuable player on the podcast because I'm the only one, other than my lovely wife who does a little bit of my social and my admin. So she's probably the most valuable player. Honey, if you listen to this, you're definitely the most valuable player. You're the real MVP. And last but not least, just another little piece. I'm working on a book at the moment. I'm hoping that will be out in the next month or two. So just keep an eye out for that. It's called the Managing Violence Handbook. It's covering off on a lot of the topics that we've discussed with guests and a little bit of extra. Really, it's a summation of the last 20 years that I've spent studying this topic. I'm really enjoying writing it, and I'm looking forward to putting it out for review. So if you'd like to be in for the pre-orders, or you'd like to be part of a review panel, hit me up on Facebook at Managing Violence. And I'd be happy to form up a bit of a launch party. All right, that does it for me. On to Gabe. What an incredible story. You guys are going to love this one. I'm not going to rabbit on about it too much. Let's hear it from Gabe himself. All right, Gabe, thanks for joining me on the podcast today, mate. It's been a pleasure. We've had a short hiccup in getting there, but it's been good talking to you offline, so I think we should probably hit record and start with the interview.
Absolutely.
So, Gabe, look, your story is pretty fascinating, and I don't want to waste too much time getting into it because I want to give you a chance to tell the listeners what your life has been and go through your journey. So, if we can just start at the beginning, man, can you tell us a little bit about growing up and how you got to where you are?
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me, by the way. Yeah, I grew up on Long Island in the state of New York, United States, and about 45 minutes from the city. And decent home. My mother and father didn't use drugs or alcohol. Reform Jewish home. All my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. So I grew up listening to stories about the Holocaust, and actually went to this, we just called it Jewish school. We didn't belong to anything formal, a synagogue or anything like that, but it was a school I went to on Sundays as a kid that was run by a woman who was a survivor. She was a child in Auschwitz, and so we learned Yiddish. Or they tried to teach me Yiddish. I couldn't really, never really picked it up. But and then just kind of Jewish history and Holocaust education, and um, my parents were real frugal, and I don't know, man. I just had a chip on my shoulder, and I wanted what all the other kids wanted. I guess you could say. I mean, I come from a Jewish family, so I think I can say this. But it was, my parents were kind of like the stereotypical, very frugal, like if you don't need it, we're not getting it, type of parents. And I was growing up on Long Island, where in upper middle class neighborhood, and kids, 16 years old, were getting brand new BMWs, and I just kind of grew up envying what the other kids had, and started using drugs and alcohol when I was about 13. Tried cocaine for the first time when I was 15. And that same year, I shot somebody with a pellet gun. It wasn't with a real firearm, but I did get arrested. It did make the newspapers. My mother was ashamed and devastated, and she had anxiety disorder and some mental health issues growing up. So there was no drugs and alcohol, but it was very it was dysfunctional, 'cause my mother had some psychiatric issues, and then when I was 15 and got arrested for that shooting, she was embarrassed, and I just got into drugs and started selling cocaine in the ninth grade. I had some guys in my neighborhood that were pretty big drug dealers, and they just kind of became my mentors and idols. Big dudes on steroids, that went to the gym. They were the bouncers down at the nightclubs, and so I was running coke and stuff and doing stuff for these guys. And by the time I was 18, I uh, got real strung out, dropped out of high school, tried to join the army, failed the drug test. The army wouldn't take me, and I went to my first drug rehab. Came back, got a job at Gold's Gym, and really just started getting into lifting weights, but I was still partying. The rehab really didn't. I really went to rehab. I wanted to know so I could sell coke and not do it, so I could make money. I
Right.
I was I was a drug addict. I was a kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was running with these big guys, guys 6'7", 300 pounds, uh, nobody and I had a big chip on my shoulder. Nobody laid a hand on me because they knew who I was down with. It was, so I didn't really fight that much growing up because I didn't have to. But, you know, I was burning a lot of bridges fast. And then when I was 19, I started smoking crack. I tried freebase cocaine for the first time, and it was really downhill from there fast. Um, I got hooked up with some guys in Jamaica, Queens, real rough section of Queens, New York. I was selling $400 silk dresses out of the back of my car that may or may not have come off the back of hijacked trucks.
Yeah,
And
you never struck me as a dress salesman.
well, it was easy. It was just exciting. I was running with gangsters, and I just thought that was cool. And I got pulled over by New York City police, and they told me that, they told me to go home. Basically, they're like, "You're gonna get, murdered. Someone's gonna kill you, and just take everything." That's how it works out here. That was my first little wake up call. And my uncle, I had an uncle that lives in Denver, Colorado, and he heard what was going on, and basically just said, I'll buy you one-way ticket to Colorado. You stay at my house. You get involved with Narcotics Anonymous. I got a friend in the program. You stay clean and sober. You could live with us until you figure out what you want to do. And if you start using, we're gonna kick you out. I had two younger cousins, and my uncle. I just packed a duffel bag and got on a plane and came out to Denver, Colorado when I was 19, and tried to do, tried to work the program, but I really wasn't doing the work. I was a kid and trying to find my way, and had that big chip on my shoulder too, still from New York. And I got high. I met a girl and stayed out, for a night and used and came back, and he told me to get my shit and get out of the house. And so for the first time in my life, I was homeless. And at that time, before that, let me back up. I had stole my dad's car, ripped off a drug dealer, got the windows shot out, crashed the car, took money out of their bank account. I mean, my family wrote me off. They wrote me off for dead. They were like, "You're gonna live or you're gonna die." My father basically told me, "But you're not gonna do it here anymore. We can't live like this." So I went out to stay with my uncle. He took a chance on me. Just celebrated his 75th birthday, and he's in my corner, man. But he gave me the tough love back then when I was 19. Kicked me out of his house, and I discovered where the homeless shelters were, and where crack was, because that's really what I wanted. I just wanted to get high. I used to call it temporary suicide. I just wanted to kind of kill the pain. I didn't really want to die, but I didn't know how I was going to get out of this and how I would ever really have a real life. And they had some serious gang violence going on out here at that time, a lot of shootings and stuff. And I found myself in the middle of it, white boy from New York. And I thought I was tough. If people that live in the United States, I thought I was tough because I was from New York. I thought just being from New York was supposed to make you tough, and I soon found out, one, I didn't know how to fight, and I had a chip on my shoulder. So, all this shit I was pulling in New York, people were calling me out. I was living on the streets. And so I got robbed. I got my ass kicked. I started getting arrested for petty offenses. And then I would get my shit together. I found a job. I got a job at Bally's. This was on and off for years. So from 19 till about 23, I was on and off the streets. I got a job managing a health club for Bally's, and I was a hustler, man. I could get my foot in the door, but I really couldn't maintain a life because I wasn't willing to get
Because the
sober.
drugs kind of took over, yeah.
Yeah, every time I got a job or apartment, and I got into management, I got my own club. I was 23. I thought I was on top of the world, but as soon as I got a paycheck, I was so addicted that once I started using, I could blow all that money in a weekend and then not go to work. And then it was just this cycle of like getting jobs, getting fired for not showing up, and cleaning it up. And then, so anyways, I did that for years, met my first wife, had two little boys. And then we moved up to the western slope of Colorado, get out of Denver, try to get away from all my friends. Didn't know how to read a tape measure, or never did carpentry work, but there was a lot of construction going on, and got a job as a carpenter's helper, and was trying to do the 9 to 5 and be married and have a family. But I was 40 miles from Aspen, Colorado, and found out that there's a lot of cocaine up there. So in 1996, I caught my first drug case, my first felony conviction, which held a 2.5-year prison sentence. But they gave me, I had a job and I had a young family. I had 2 little boys, and they gave me a chance. They let me out on probation and sent me to a halfway house. I got high, left the halfway house, got 90 days in jail, got out, 60 days in jail, got out. And finally, the judge just said, "I got to send you to prison." And they sent me to a place called Buena Vista Correctional Facility. And it was known back then, that was in 1998. They used to call it Gladiator School because it's where they sent, a lot of gangbangers, kids that they had to get off the streets. And So it was a pretty rough place, and that was a pretty big wake up call. Um, and then, and being Jewish and having Jewish last name, my last name's Cohen. It's very segregated in prison. White guys are with white guys, and they're usually like Aryan brothers, like Nazis or biker guys, and then you got the blacks and you got the Mexicans, and so I always kind of rode solo, so that they called it solo kind of.
Yeah, it's a bit tough life for a New York Jew in prison.
Yeah, and my first two kids, by the way, are of Hispanic descent. So I'm Jewish. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors. One of my best friends is part African American. So I wasn't racist at all, and I wasn't trying to click up with nobody. And what really saved me, well, two things in the prison system was one, at that time they diagnosed me with being bipolar, manic depressant, and I had PTSD from some sexual childhood abuse from neighbors. Yeah, I'm open about it today. I share my story with inmates. We'll get to that later. But so I would wait on Medline. I was on Medline, and everybody wants to know what kind of psych meds you're taking, and they kind of judge, your character, this guy, depending on what kind of psych meds you take. And then the other thing was the weight pile. I mean, I was out there hitting it pretty hard, and 5'9". If I was under 200 pounds, I always thought I was kind of skinny. So I wasn't really that big of a guy, but I held my own out on the weight pile, and before I knew it, I'd be working out with the bikers, and I was just friends with everybody, man. I just tried to be even keeled kind of guy. And anyways, that was my first time in prison. Got out and really didn't pursue changing my life. Didn't really make a plan on how I was going to change, and so long story short, that was in 1998. By 2010, so about 12 years later, I had 3 felony convictions, felony menacing for going after a guy that I caught in an apartment with a girlfriend of mine, an escape. I took off from a halfway house and cut off a GPS unit. Escape sounds pretty sensational, like I dug like a tunnel out of a prison or something, but it's really not that.
You could probably build a much better story around that.
Yeah, I could be bullshitting hard. I basically just cut a piece of rubber off my ankle that had a GPS unit on it. But that carries a 2-year sentence.
Movie out of that.
Right? Hey, well, it carries, that's 2 years. So I did 21 months on that. But I was a repeat parole violator, not being home on curfew, or every time I got high, if I failed a drug test, I knew they'd put a warrant out for my arrest. So I just hit the streets. So, I was on and off the streets for 12 years. I was basically on parole and in and out of prison. I've been to prison a total of 7 times. And everyone says like parole is a setup, and when you get out, they're just waiting for you to mess up, and that's all bullshit. At least in my opinion. They do want you to jump through certain hoops, but if you're willing to do something different, you can make it on parole. And it took me. I'm a hard slow learner, but I woke up in prison one day. I was 40 years old. My oldest son was about to graduate high school, and my younger son was in 10th grade, and I had no money in the bank. I had no job. I had nowhere to live. I had nothing. And I was 40 years old, and I was I had read the Bible several times. I tried Orthodox Judaism in prison, got out. That didn't help me. I tried Messianic Judaism. That didn't help me. And then I got turned on to Jesus Christ, and it was really hard for me to be like, one day I believe in this, and now I believe in that. I really struggled with faith and what that all means, but this Jesus guy really appealed to me. He was I felt like an outcast, and I felt like I was no good, and my identity was I'm a felon, I'm not going to get a job, I'm a deadbeat dad, I'm a drug addict, I broke my parents' hearts, most of my life's probably over. Um, and then I read a scripture in Revelations 1:6. It says that he has made us kings and priests. And I like that. And I cross-referenced it with 1 Peter 2:9. It says that, we're part of a royal priesthood. And I like that, and I like the love and the compassion that Jesus had on the people that were the outcasts and down and out, and that the higher ups just kind of wrote off for dead, because I could identify with that. And
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's yeah, given your life story, I can see why that yeah, that was so powerful for you. And I think we'll revisit that later on in the interview when
sure,
we start talking about your ministry. I just
yeah,
want to unpack something you said about yeah, being in and out of prison. It's something that look through yeah, there for the grace of God go I. I mean, it's something I haven't had to experience, but I've known a few guys that have, and I'm always interested your mindset around that time. I mean, you've been running pretty hard since you're a teenager. You're dealing with criminals and gangsters all the time. You're getting out of prison, and you're still partying. Did you? What was your mindset? Did you expect that you probably weren't going to live long? That eventually something was going to happen to you, or were you just kind of figuring you'll just go for as long as you can until you end up back in prison and just keep repeating indefinitely?
yeah. Great question. A combination of everything you just said, and I've said it a lot. Basically, I just thought someone was going to kill me. I was going to get murdered on the streets, or if that did, I was either going to get murdered, I was going to overdose, or I was going to spend the rest of my life in prison. I mean, I really didn't see any way out. By the time I was in my 30s, and I got really in, it wasn't just cocaine. I got into methamphetamine, and I was, uh, without going into too much detail, but I was selling drugs, and was a part of saw a lot of violence, and just, you know, I just I didn't know how I was going to get out of it. There was a part of me that wanted a different life. I always wanted a different life. I just didn't know how to attain it. And yeah, I thought I was going to wind up dead on the street, uh, or in prison for the rest of my life. And you know, it, we can explore it more if you want to talk about it. But the sixth time I was in prison, so right before I got out, the seventh time, the sixth time I was in prison for that escape charge when I cut off the ankle bracelet, I went to a facility that has special medical needs unit where inmates that were either disabled, they either came in disabled, got disabled while they were in prison, or just had health issues. It was also like a hospice floor, for inmates that were sick and terminally ill and dying. And they had a nursing assistance program. And I was getting into the Word of God at the time, and thought, I have 2-year sentence. I want to spend my time helping people and try to redeem myself with God. And so I took the nursing program. I found out I had to change grown men's diapers. I had to bathe them, shave them, feed them, dress them, take them out in the yard. I didn't even know if I could do that type of work. Um, but I wanted to experience it, and I wanted to pray for these guys. So and when I got out after doing that for 2 years, I thought, God saw my good works, and it really, that time really made me think, how do I want to spend the rest of my days? There was a guy that I saw, several of those guys that were terminally ill die while I worked there, and it's a cold, hard place to spend your last days with no family around. And one guy, they called the family the family didn't even want the body. They're like, we haven't seen that guy in 20 years. Like, do whatever you do with it. And really got me
Yeah, wow.
thinking. And then I
Yeah,
got out.
that's not how you want your last days, is it?
No, and not, so that was like 38. And then I did good. I had 2 years clean sobriety in prison. I didn't use in prison. And then I got out. I had about another year clean, got a housing voucher, hooked up with a woman that had her own drug problems, psychiatric issues, and had a domestic parole violation. And that's when I went to prison for the seventh time. And I just thought, that I thought I had it, man. And then, I realized I was in a very unhealthy relationship, lesson learned. And I just was determined that I'm going to do things different when I get out. Uh, and that I got out, and this is where I got into Krav Maga. And God
Yeah,
and
just
God
before.
slash Krav Maga changed my life.
Yeah, that's the next chapter. But I just want to ask you about something
Sure.
that
Whatever you
Rory
want.
Miller. Yeah, man. Rory Miller talks a lot in his first book about how for a lot of for a lot of career criminals, jail is actually more comfortable than being on the street, and it. There's a certain amount of self-sabotage that goes on just to get back into jail. Do you feel like that was the case for you, or were you actively trying to stay out? More
No,
than
no. There were times, Joe, when I literally walked in the police station and was like, "There's a warrant out for my arrest. Like, I can't take you know, I need to sleep. There's people that want to kill me." I've turned myself in just so I could go back to prison, and you know, I, uh, I functioned well in prison because there was structure, and like I said, I didn't get high in prison because I had so much trauma from living on the streets that when I got to prison, the last thing I wanted to do was use. I wanted to be on top of my game. But yeah, it was like a sick comfort zone. I was okay being on the streets, but I would get so strung out that my life would just crumble, and then I was always kind of ready to go back to jail. I wasn't trying too hard not to
yeah,
go back to jail, but uh it's funny that you mentioned Rory Miller. I just met him for the first time 2 weeks ago. Went to a seminar of his, and I've read Meditations on Violence. I try to read it once a year. I've known about him since 2013, so it was great honor, very humbling to meet him and train with him. And he was really generous with his time. We had some good conversation.
yeah. Rory's a really good guy. I've had him on the podcast twice now, and we've
Super humble, huh?
man, look, when I started this podcast, Rory was one of my bucket list guests. I thought maybe after a couple of years, if I've built a good reputation, maybe Rory will do the podcast. And I reached out to him just as I started the podcast. He was like my second ever interview, and he
Oh
was more than
wow.
happy to. I was like, man, I've
Yeah.
made it. I've made it.
No, isn't
Rory's on
he?
my podcast.
Yeah, isn't he? He's extremely humble and generous, and just, man, knows his stuff, man. The psychology and his martial arts. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, absolutely, man. He's a great guy, and he's got a tremendous gift for being able to explain things that most people never experience in a way that everyone can understand. So, uh,
Absolutely.
back to your story though. So you're 40 years old. You've got out of prison for the seventh time. You're sober now. What happens next?
So I'm downtown Denver. There was actually a shelter called Jesus Saves, and you could sleep there, but they kick you out at 5 in the morning, and you can't come back till 5 at night. And my goal, I told my mother, who was alive back then, that so this is like 2010, 2011. Uh, I said I'm gonna do what I got to do. I'm gonna do what I got to do to move back up. So Denver's 200 miles away from where I live now on the western slope of Colorado. I live over the Rocky Mountain Range. I live on the western side of the mountains. When you're in Denver and you see the mountain range, so and that's where my kids were. And I said, I don't care if I got to live in the woods, but I'm gonna do whatever it takes. I want to reestablish a relationship with my sons before they graduate high school. And my older son was going to be a senior that year, and I thought I got to try to get back into his life. That was really my motivation. Well, him and my younger boy, I just want to get back in touch with them before they journey off and do their thing. I may never have another chance. Um, but in the meantime, I had to, I had to get some stuff situated in the city, and I was staying at a homeless shelter, and I was reading the book based on the Steven Spielberg movie Munich, about the 72 Olympic massacre of the Jewish athletes, the Israeli athletes, and I discovered the words Krav Maga for the first time. And you know, I had, it's interesting. I had hurt my rotator cuff bench pressing in prison, and talk about feeling vulnerable. I mean, I couldn't lift that last time when I was in there, and I was feeling real, vulnerable. I could barely lift my left arm up over my head because of my rotator cuff. And so when I got out and I was staying at the shelter, my a saving grace of mine was going to the gym and hitting those weights and taking out my frustration and my anger, and that was kind of like my anchor in life. Whether I was in prison or on the streets, I always tried to hit the gym, and I couldn't do it. And
I know how you feel. I've got a torn rotator cuff at the moment. It's
oh, so you can relate, right?
you, yeah, you don't realize how debilitating it is.
Yeah, I couldn't do any lat pull downs. I couldn't do any pull ups. I couldn't bench press, shoulder press, like nothing. And I thought, well, and as a kid, backing up, like in the mid '80s, I had a punching bag and like a poster of Rocky, the movie Rocky Balboa, uh, on my wall, and I did a little. There was a thing called American Combat Karate. This guy Rich Barathi, he was kind of a well-known street fighter
Yeah,
bouncer.
I remember.
Do you
Yeah,
remember? Yeah.
yeah,
He
yeah,
uh
yeah.
he was on Johnny Carson show breaking bricks, like with his bare on fire with his hands, and he had a gym, and that's where I met there was a bodybuilder, and I'm actually still friends with him, uh Jim Quinn, Big Jim Quinn, and I met Jimmy Quinn there, and then he was showing me how to lift weights. So I dabbled with a little martial arts, but never really pursued it. And I discovered the words Krav Maga, and then I thought, whoa, this is what the Israelis train. I wanted to learn more about it, so I got online, and I had to have the librarian teach me how to surf the web. I didn't even know how to get on the internet. This was back in 2010, and and it's funny. My first email address was a Kings and Priests because of that scripture, and that was back then. That's actually the name of my ministry today. Because I'm like, I'm a king and I'm a priest, and I'm gonna ride with that. And then I started studying, researching Krav Maga, and lo and behold, there was a Krav Maga uh, gym, um, like literally, no, it was probably about 8 blocks from the homeless shelter. And so I had enough money uh, in my pocket to sign up for a month, and I think I did. I was there for 6 weeks before I saved up for a bus ticket to come to the Western Slope to get back with my kids. So I was living at the shelter and homeless on and off for 6 weeks, and was taking Krav Maga, and I fell in love with it. I could get my aggression out. I could kick. I could knee. My shoulder was getting better. I wasn't lifting any heavy weights, and I was just, it just really spoke to me, man. You know, I don't want to fight. I don't want any problems. But if I gotta fight, boom. And then, the more I learned about Krav Maga, I was like, I've been doing this for the last 20 years. I just didn't know what you call it, which is basically you do whatever
Yeah,
you
well,
got to do to
that's right.
survive.
Well, it's interesting, man. Like given your life story, one could put two and two together and go, well, he's a Krav Maga guy, and he grew up around violence. He must have learned Krav Maga to deal with the violence. But you actually learned Krav Maga after the violent part of your life was done.
Yeah, it was more just I just needed to do something physical because I needed that outlet, and I wasn't really into I wasn't um uh into like CrossFit or like running marathons, or I was just used to like lifting heavy weight, for me, for my size. I had like 300 plus bench, 400 squat, and that was, I wasn't huge, but I was just used to like throwing weight, get my aggression out in the gym. And now I didn't have that because of my rotator cuff, but they were cranking heavy metal music in this gym. I've learned the different types of, the different Krav Maga organizations and the different styles of classes, but this was one of those real commercial grade where it was like pumping the music and hitting as hard as you can and sweating, and I was just digging it, man. It just spoke to me. Yeah. So yeah, so I got up here, I got up to the Western Slope, and in my I just had like my prison dress out clothes and a couple pairs of sweats that I used for my Krav Maga class, and um, came up here on a Greyhound bus. And there's a hostel in Glenwood Springs here in town, and they had like kind of, it was a house with cots and common rooms and shared kitchen and bathroom, and it might have been like $20 a night or something. Um, and so I got a cot. I got a place at the hostel, and then there was um, this place called Mind Springs, which was the mental health place, and they had a 2-hour duly diagnosed group. Um, Getting out of prison, I was diagnosed with the bipolar and PTSD, and with the drug addiction, and uh, they took me in, and I went to 2-hour group counseling twice a week. I didn't work at this time. My focus was just on my recovery, and I found I started church shopping, looking for the right church, and going to meetings and recovery meetings, and going to and individual therapy. And I was trying to get back in with my kids' lives. I did 6 weeks of Krav Maga, of course. There's no Krav Maga up here. Nobody has even heard of it. I think they thought it was like Thai food or something when I would say it. They just looked at me blank, And
Yeah.
but I had worked as a personal trainer on and off for years, and I was looking up for a common bond with my kids. I started hitting the gym, and in the basement of this gym at the Hotel Colorado by the hot springs pool up here in Glenwood Springs, a friend of mine, I met this guy, Jeff. I'll give him a little plug, Jeff Austin, good guy, and he was teaching a kickboxing class, in this like aerobics room. It was a $10 drop-in fee. And my kids were into boxing, and I said, I'll pay for you guys, I'll buy you gear, but why don't we meet here? And that was kind of our common thread, our that they went to high school, they were doing their thing. You can imagine, I hadn't been in their lives for like 10 years, and all of a sudden dad shows up and wants to be best friends. And but they would meet me at the gym, and we started doing a little kickboxing together, and I was lifting weights and building a relationship with my sons. And Jeff, I actually got the idea, this guy didn't have his own gym. He was a blue collar guy, and he just subleased that space. He taught a class in this space. And I thought, I bet I could do that if I could learn Krav Maga somehow. And I talked to the gym, and they said, well, you got to be certified. And I said, like, what does that mean? And that, well, you got to have a piece of paper. You got to have some type of credential. Can't let you just in here and just start teaching, And so I started researching Krav Maga organizations. And in the meantime, I was doing my therapy, and then I started working with the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. And I wanted to try life at this time without medication. I mean, I was on lithium, Depakote, Trazodone, Seroquel, just all these different, they tried all these different drugs. I was on lithium for years. I started having liver damage from it. They switched me to a different drug. And I just thought, I don't, it's going to shorten my life. I'm off drugs and alcohol now. Now I just, I want to see, I want to see what my moods are like without this. And they didn't think it was a good idea, but you know, I started just I kept continue with my therapy. I got off all my psych meds, and I worked with department vocational rehab. Uh, they told me if I could write a business plan of why I could get a grant for tools, and I go to work as a carpenter. I try to get off the social service system here that was basically supporting me, get back into the workforce. And it took over a year of rejections, but I got tools and I started working. I got a carpentry job and I bought a cheap vehicle, got my license back. Um, and then from that carpentry job, I found a Krav Maga organization that did like an instructor course, uh, level one. And I had nobody to train with, man. I had no classes. He said most people take classes for like a year and then they test. And if you pass the test and you prove that you could teach these techniques, then you become an instructor. And I said, well, I'm pretty confident. Like, I do you have a book or do you have DVD? Anything I can study from. And so I bought some DVDs. I bought the manual, and that was with the United States Krav Maga Association. The owner of that association was in the first group of black belts from Darren Levine's worldwide, and just politics and egos. He decided he could do what they were doing, and basically it was the same techniques. When you look at his manual and their manual, he just started his own company, and it wasn't nearly as expensive. So I went with that, and I flew. It was my first time like making travel arrangements to fly to another state, and I flew to Kentucky and did my level one and my level two uh, Krav Maga instructor certification course. And then I approached the Glenwood Springs Community Center and said, is there a time when you don't have any current classes in the aerobics room? I would like to teach a class. I'm certified. And they said, well, you need to get liability insurance. You have to buy your own striking shield. So, I mean, insurance was like $300. I bought some focus mitts, a couple kick shields. I was in business for like, $500-600. The flight and the hotel cost me, about as much as the training was. But yeah, I worked. I started, and then I started my own class with the mindset that I wanted other people to train with, and then I could practice my level 3 techniques on them, and then go test for level 3, and then train my test and train my level 4, and then level 5, and then my goal was to get my black belt. Um, I even got my law enforcement instructor certification. Uh, they they let me do everything but go on the range and shoot, because as a felon here in America, you can't possess firearms. And he said, look, I'm not going to judge you on your past. I think you're a good guy, and you got a great story and you can inspire people. And he's like, so I went down to Florida and trained with law enforcement officers for a week. Got my Leo cert, and uh, yeah, man, in less than 4 years, I flew to Texas twice. I flew to Kentucky, Florida, worked in construction, and then like we had talked about earlier, like yourself, I went back into I got jobs bouncing at bars because I wanted to see, if what I was learning was practical. Plus I knew I could make money doing it, and I wasn't really scared of the job. Uh, and it was, for me, it was like training ground. And I was reading Meditations of Violence back then. That's when I first got turned on to it, and started experiencing, like, I wanted to go experience the adrenaline dump every weekend. I wanted to go see if I would freeze. I wanted to see my self-talk, my mindset, my breathing, everything I was preaching and teaching in class, I was living every weekend. And plus, just with my background, with all the violence I'd seen over the decades, man, it all just kind of meshed. And yeah, the rest is history, so to speak. I got my black belt like February 2016, but in 2015 I landed. I was on the cover of a weapons disarming book for Krav Maga, and I started my business, American Krav Maga, created the logo, got on social media, Facebook, and some guys in Argentina saw me on the book cover, and it was real funny, Joe. He couldn't speak English and I couldn't speak Spanish, but we both used the translator on Facebook Messenger, and he worked for 6 months. Him and his friends, they either wanted an American or an Israeli to come teach them Krav Maga and get certified instructors. And I told him, I said, if you just get me a plane ticket, I'll do it for free, man, and I'll sleep in your backyard. And I've never been outside this country, by the way. I've never flown outside the United States at this time. And we worked on it for about 6 weeks. And in the meantime, by the way, I kept calling security companies trying to get a job. I wanted to get into bodyguard work and executive protection, but being a felon, not being able to possess a firearm, people were shutting their doors on me, shutting the doors on, shutting me. Finally, I found a company that would work with me and said, "Hey, man, I used to be a cop. I'm a good judge of character. You can't be armed, but you got the skill set, and we need a guy like you to kind of set the precedent in some of these bars." So they, I was only getting paid $13 an hour. This was in 2014. I would work all week construction, 40, 50 hours a week, teach Krav Maga 3 nights a week. And then on the weekends, I would drive 70 miles each way from my house just to make like $60 a shift. It cost me $20 in gas. But
Yeah.
it was a security company, and they made me a supervisor. And I was
Yeah, wow.
I was regulating, man. And it was just about establishing a resume. Like, I had to put in the work and pay my dues. But I did it. And eventually, yeah, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, sorry, man. I was just going to say, so eventually you end up writing a book. So how did the book come about?
Well, so I got, my goal was to work at the nightclubs up in Aspen, because I figured that's where the money's at. That's like the playground for the billionaires and millionaires, and I live 40 miles from Aspen, Colorado. So I started going to I started working at one of the live music venues, and when they had celebrity acts, they were putting me in front of the stage, and my reputation, I just started getting my name out there in the community. And I had a guy, another Krav Maga black belt that lives back east. He said he wanted to know if I wanted to partner up with him and maybe do a book on self-defense. And I said, I'm working as a bouncer, and they nicknamed me the Pit Bull because I was known to be a little aggressive, and I wasn't starting fights, but if something needed to be handled, I was just jumping in and handling it. And so they said, my boss said, nobody wants a dog that bites until they need a dog that bites. And so they called me the Pit Bull. Yeah. And so because a lot of times the clubs wanted to fire me. I had one bar pay me to go home early. They were just like, "Dude, you're too crazy. Like we don't, like, you got to go." But I wasn't taking no shit from nobody. And sometimes they'd make me stay in the DJ booth. And I was only like the penalty box in hockey. Like, I was only allowed to come out if the other bouncers couldn't handle what was going on. I was like a shot caller. I would just stay
like
there and observe.
in case of emergency, break open glass.
Right. And I'm not that big of a guy, but I just had, after all the shit I've been through and being in prison, you go to some of these clubs, by the way, this is when I'm 45 years old. So, these are kids to me. This is like child's play. You know what I mean? At least that's how I looked at it. Having said that, I did get sucker punched and got my eye socket broken and my nose broken and needed surgery at one year. Think shit still happens, but I said, man, I would love to write a book, Pit Bull Bouncer, and put some of my, I think it would be a good guide to help guys. I said, a lot of these guys, they have no clue what they're getting into. They have no idea. They're there for their ego. They want easy money. They want to pick up girls. They're not paying attention. And I thought, this would be a good book, for a young guy that maybe he wants to get involved with this work. Maybe he's on the fence, doesn't know if he should, or the guy that's actually doing it. Um, and if he's got an open mind and he's humble and wants to learn more, it's a great, great learning tool. I'm a little biased because I wrote it, but I've gotten really good feedback, and they're selling books around the world now, so it's humbling and exciting.
Yeah, man, I've seen some very good reviews. I've been meaning to pick up a copy myself for the last couple of months, but I haven't got to it yet. But rest assured, I certainly will.
So send me,
Mate,
when we get done, you send me your address, and I got you. I got one for you.
oh, perfect, man. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. So look, just to wrap up, I know this is super important to you, so I want to make sure that we have time to touch
Sure.
on it. Tell me about your
Absolutely.
ministry, your jail ministry. So I mean, you've got a hell of a life story. You grow up, there's some abuse in your childhood. You end up on drugs. You end up with catching some felonies. You spend
Sure.
a good portion of your life in jail. You get out. You find Krav Maga. You end up training police officers, which is pretty crazy to begin with. That a convicted felon ends up training police. There's a whole bunch we could unpack there. But now
Sure.
you're back in prisons, although
Yeah.
on the right side of things, and you're running a ministry. So let's just give you a chance to tell everyone what you
Oh,
do there, how that works, and what wakes you up in the morning to do this.
sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Yeah. So, you know, my first class in 2013 was with the community center here in Glenwood Springs. Now the city, I have a building where they let me teach out of still, um, the oldest building in the city. And, you know, I've, I really wanted to give back. I really wanted to and by the way, I have a 6-year-old son now. I'm remarried. I have a wonderful wife, very supportive. Couldn't have done this without her support and just understanding that, I need to do this for myself. This is my passion, and she lets me travel. And so, you know, I started seeing a lot of guys in town. They kind of know my story, and through my church, my pastor used to be a parole officer and used to do a Bible study at the jail. And he said, "You should go. You'd be great. You should go see if they'll take you as a volunteer." And so I filled out an application a couple years ago, and they rejected me. I hadn't been out of prison long enough. And then this year, honestly, Joe, I started feeling a little empty inside. I mean, I love Krav Maga. I love what I'm doing. I've been to 3 different countries now. I've got 7 affiliates around the United States using my logo, but I wasn't really I was just feeling a little depressed and a little empty inside, and I just felt like I needed to do something more. And I thought, I'm going to revisit the volunteer application and see if the sheriff's department will let me in the jail. And so I proposed a Bible study. It's called Kings and Priests Ministry, from that scripture that spoke to me. Because, these guys they need a new identity, man. And I want to tell them, I tell them I go in the jail, and I'm in the medium security facility from 8 to 9 on Friday mornings, and then from 9 to 10 I'm in the minimum. And I let them know that there's greatness in this room, that it doesn't matter what people say about you. You need to throw that behind you, because they're going to say all sorts of things about you. Okay, what you need to be focusing on is what God says about you, because that's the truth. And then I share my story, how I came up here with nothing, and now I'm internationally recognized. I've got, a new wife, a new chance to be a good dad. And I got a relationship with my sons, and I just let them know it's never too late. And I've since spoken, downtown at the city jail in Denver, where this all started for me, that kind of where I was on the streets. And I know my chaplain from down there is a good friend now. He follows me on Facebook. He was the defensive tactics officer for the sheriff's department. So I got all these connections now. And now I'm about to get into another county jail, 40 miles in the other direction, for the ministry. And I'm currently talking to community leaders and various church groups. My next goal is to open up a transitional living house for guys getting out of jail or prison to help them with reentry into the community and making wiser choices and changing their life. That's about it, man.
Man, that's an amazing story, and we could do like probably 5 episodes just unpacking
I really
different elements of your
appreciate
story.
this.
But it's tremendous. And look, if people want to know more about you, if they want to book you for a seminar or to speak to their church, or they've got other opportunities for you, where can I send them to? Where can they find out more about you or get in touch with you?
So my website is gabecohendefense.com, defense with an S. My email, gabe@gabecohendefense.com. And they can find me on Facebook, American Krav Maga Facebook page, Gabe Cohen Facebook page. Yeah, man, just hit me a line, shoot me a private message. My book, Pitbull Bouncer, look for it on Amazon. And I also, if you write me, contact me, I got, I'll sign a copy and send it to you as well. And of course, I got the American Krav Maga t-shirts and ball caps. So check out my Facebook page, YouTube and Instagram. So thank you so much, Joe, for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, my friend, and thank you so much for giving up your time to tell your story, because I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of listeners that are going to draw from your story. It's unique. We haven't had anyone on this podcast that's been able to speak with authenticity about what you've spoken about, and to me, that's just so valuable. So thank you so much for giving up your time, and I'll be sure to let you know when this comes out, because I think it's going to be very popular.
Thanks so much. I look forward to it. Again, I'm very humble. Right. Thank you, Joe. Have a great day.
Man, what a story. Didn't I tell you guys? Who else goes from being in prison 7 times to training cops and running a jail ministry? That's pretty cool, man. I really enjoyed talking to Gabe. Great guy. And look, just wish him nothing but the best. So please check him out on social media. Check out his website. Go buy his book. Support the work he's doing. He's doing a tremendous job. All right. Next week we are doing a Q&A episode. So if you've got questions for me, anything you'd like to know about the podcast, about any of my guests, about anything I've learned, about my background, my stories, anything like that, please shoot them over to me on Facebook. So go to facebook.com/managingviolence. Send me a direct message with your question, and I'll add it to the list, and we're going to do a Q&A episode next week. After that, I've still got plenty of great guests lined up. We've got a couple of interviews in the can waiting to come out. I've got some huge names that I've just confirmed that will probably end up being season 3, but we've got a bit of a secret about season 3 as well, so just sit tight on that one. Just a reminder, please go check out the social media accounts. Instagram, I'm at Managing Violence. Facebook.com/Managing Violence. YouTube, I'm on there as Managing Violence. Or something. I'm on YouTube or something. Who knows? Just type in Joe Saunders Managing Violence. You'll find me on YouTube. Twitter, at Joe Saunders MVP. Check it all out. Have fun. Watch the stuff. Be good. Be excellent to each other. Be good human beings. I'm rambling. I'll talk to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Managing Violence podcast. For more information, to view previous episodes, or to read blogs, articles, and so much more, please check out my website at www.joesaunders.com.au. That's www.joesaunders.com.au. Thank you. Talk to you next time.